Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so welcome in this workshop on active citizenship. I don't want, we are in a workshop about active citizenship and participation, so we cannot do this that we are only talking. So we really would like this to be very interactive, and the main thing that I will try to do, with the danger also to overlap a little bit with things that have already been done in the session on active citizenship in the Impulse dialogue, is to give a short introduction to the topic we want to treat. So I think it's important to what we would like to look at active citizenship and participation from two sides. On the one hand, it's clear and has already been covered several times that participation, public support, active engagement of stakeholders is a key element of urban food policy processes. Without that, they will not work. But you can also look at it from the other side. There is also the active citizenship, bottom-up initiatives driven by civil society actors that are an important source of dynamism and innovation in urban food policy. So what we would like to do in this session, and in an interactive way, and hopefully also building on examples that you are engaged with, or dilemmas that you are engaged with, to go into the question, how can participatory processes be designed to ensure more accessible, equitable, and effective? I want to say a little bit more on those two sides. So on the one hand, we can look at active citizenship within urban food policy from the perspective of government and policy. I think here it's very clear and good to realize that policy as such is never enough to really realize changes and result in system transformation towards a more healthy, sustainable, and social just food system. Only if policy is at the same time also linked to actions and engagement of other key stakeholders, changes will be made. So this buy-in and engagement of citizens and other key stakeholders is crucial. You can also even frame this in terms of the need to have a broad public support for policies, not only people who are actively engaged in food policy activities, but also the wider public. And of course, the big question is then, what are mechanisms of policy co-creation, and how can we find ways to more systematically engage citizens and link citizen-based processes in food policies? But then there is also this other side of active citizenship, which is more from the wider perspective of governance and social movement. Well, here we see a number of shifts in thinking that I think are very important and would be very interesting to share with you as well, also with your experiences. So it's increasingly clear that when we are talking about this urban food policy processes, we're not only talking about food policy, we're also talking about wider processes of democratization, food democracy, even maybe politicization of food, which also implies a shift in, well, the role, or how we think about the role of different actors. I mean, we can look at people from a value chain perspective, and then we are producers and consumers, but in the end we are also all food citizens, and food citizens which have an active compromise or an active engagement, maybe even an active responsibility in shaping the food policy. And food democracy with active and capable, competent food citizens is not possible, you might say. Of course, we see a lot here happening, all kind of mechanisms that come up, all kind of initiatives that come up. I will show some possible forms as a starter, and it is clear that here there is a lot of the dynamism and innovation that is occurring in urban food policy. That is not so much triggered by policy, it's more triggered by this civic food networks, these civic initiatives. But this also raises the question, what kind of institutional innovations and arrangement can we make to also structurally give place and mobilize this citizenship in food policy? So that this is not something that is occurring next to food policy development, but really makes an integral part of this. Well, maybe the central question that we are talking about, and that could also be maybe an entry point for the discussion, is what are then mechanisms to shape active citizenship in urban food policy? Well, of course, there is a lot already happening. It will also maybe sometimes be contextual and locally specific. But we can see certain mechanisms coming up that would be interesting to get into this discussion. So on the one hand, from policy, we see lots of initiatives to make participation or co-creation a part of food policy development and innovation. Working with co-creation sessions, living labs, participation processes in developing food policies, all this type of things. Sometimes this type of organization related to policy is also more institutionalized. Here we come to the concept of the Food Policy Councils. I put here some German example. I think this is the Food Policy Council from Bielefeld. So this is like looking for more a kind of new institutional setting where this active citizenship can take place and maybe also be more structurally shaped. But besides of that, there are of course also other forms of active citizenship and institutional forms that come up from that, which are not so much driven by policy or focusing only specifically on policy, but yes, are very important. I just want to mention the CSAs and food communities. The Solidarische Landwirtschaft in Germany was already mentioned several times in the discussion, which are, of course, also a form to shape this active citizenship, and that possibly could have a more active role in shaping urban food policy. As the last one, I want to mention this example that I find very, very fascinating of working with more like a kind of regional food alliances of different initiatives. So not working with citizen engagement with one or a limited number of producers, but more making regional food alliances of different networks, which can include CSAs, but also local food partnerships, permaculture association. This is an example. It's called the Urban Agricultural Consortium from the north of England. You should not look too much at the name consortium like this would be a business thing. It's certainly not a business thing. It's very much an alliance of different civic associations that try to exchange and also together make like a kind of enabling policy structure and link up with local food policy. So that could be another way to shape citizenship in urban food policy and also strike this balance between more formal policy and engagement of citizens. Well, I want to leave it with this as a kind of framing and give some examples of possible initiatives. And I want to hand over to Jessica, who will introduce a more interactive session where we also hope to harvest some of your experiences and ideas.